Novak Djokovic's deportation from Australia has been delayed after an emergency court hearing in Melbourne. The move comes just hours after the immigration minister revoked the tennis star's visa for a second time. His lawyers have asked the court for a decision before Monday, allowing Djokovic to defend his crown at the Australian Open. He's also scheduled to meet immigration officials tomorrow.
Novak Djokovic's second visa cancellation comes just 3 days before the start of the Australian Open. It puts the unvaccinated tennis player's dream of a record 21st Grand Slam in limbo once again. He could be deported and banned from entering the country for 3 years. Immigration Minister Alex Hawke says the decision was made on health and good order grounds, insisting it was in the public interest to revoke the visa. The Australian government says the move protects hard-won gains against COVID-19.
Look, the world should know that Australia has clear border protection policies in place, that we've used them throughout different governments to protect Australians, and particularly our government in response to COVID-19 has used the border rules very effectively to provide protection for much of the last 2 years.
The megastar flew into Melbourne last week, claiming he had a vaccine exemption after he recovered from COVID-19 last month. But border agents revoked his visa and placed him in immigration detention for 4 nights. The government has insisted that a recent coronavirus infection does not qualify as a vaccine exemption for foreign arrivals. A judge overruled that decision on Monday. The case has seen a backlash from many Australians, with a majority wanting Djokovic removed from the country.
Personally, I think he should be held accountable if the documentation wasn't done right, whether by him or by his management.
It was revealed this week that there were errors in Djokovic's travel declaration form when he arrived in Melbourne, and that he had breached Serbia's COVID-19 isolation rules attending events after he tested positive for the virus.
And Roger Maynard joins us live now with more on tonight's court hearing. Roger, what has the court decided at this point?
Well, Djokovic's immediate future is still very unclear at this stage. It's been agreed the tennis player will meet immigration officers in Melbourne tomorrow morning, but it's not certain what that interview will involve. However, it is believed he will be returned to a quarantine hotel sometime during the day. His lawyers told this evening's court hearing that they would be challenging the minister's reasons for cancelling the visa a second time. Now, whatever the outcome, there's a lot at stake here. Fundamentally, if the deportation goes ahead, it would not only mean Djokovic being out of the Australian Open, but it would probably involve a 3-year visa cancellation, which would mean he won't be able to return to the Australian Open for at least another 3 years anyway. That would be an enormous penalty for the men's world number one. It's also a measure of the seriousness with which the Australian government is taking this matter. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said in a statement it was in the public interest to revoke the visa, which was cancelled on health and safety grounds. He said the pandemic had been incredibly difficult for all Australians who had made many sacrifices, and they rightly expected the result of these sacrifices to be protected.
Roger, what you're looking at, 3 years, no visas in that time. But in the next few days, with the Australian Open due to start on Monday, what are the possible things that could happen between now and then for Mr. Djokovic?
Well, if Djokovic wins another hearing, it could theoretically mean he might be able to play in Monday's first round. A judge will be on duty all over the weekend to hear the case, and it's unlikely that Djokovic will be deported before that hearing is held. It's also possible the tennis player could appeal to the immigration minister directly, but all this falls into the realms of speculation at the moment. What is certain is that Djokovic will be pulling out all the stops to stay in Melbourne and compete in the Australian Open. Meanwhile, Australians are divided over the cancellation of his visa, though some opinion polls conducted by local media suggest about 80% of those questioned support his deportation. And that's because so many Australians have suffered during the pandemic and been subject to the country's strict border and quarantine laws. But there's also a perception that the government might have exploited the Djokovic issue for its own political ends, using it to distract from its own shortcomings in its handling of the pandemic involving the late delivery of vaccines and, more recently, the shortage of rapid antigen test kits. All this feeds into the run-up to this year's general election, which has to be held by May. And clearly the Prime Minister doesn't want to get the electorate offside.
Thanks for that, Roger. Roger Maynard reporting from Sydney.